So Faisal, first of all, thank you so much for joining in. I'm wearing a couple of hats here. I'm part of the TME program, जिनके आप हमारा नया बैच देख रहे हैं, साथ है हमारे, and Sara is with me. I'm not sure आपकी सारा से मुलाकात नहीं हुई है. So Sara is the director for the TME program director हैं. साइमा के साथ तो आपकी होगी, I'm sure. NIC और and we have some Pasha team. We have NIC team जो कि कैमरे में नहीं आना चाह रहे, वो साइड्स पे बैठे हुए हैं, तो वो लोग भी हैं. So quickly speaking, हमारी थोड़ी सी कल से हमने जो इंट्रोडक्शन की, and this TME program is, think of it as an interdisciplinary program, a kind of a cross between a traditional MBA and a CS thing, but सबका फ्लेवर इसमें आ रहा है, और हमने इसको थोड़ा शॉर्टन करके इसमें एक्चुअल प्लेसमेंट्स का भी एक एलिमेंट डाला है. So the last semester is just placements, real placements in actual corporate or even startups. तो जो पहला वाला बैच है, इससे पहले एक ही बैच अभी ग्रेजुएट करना है, वो बैच इस वक्त प्लेसमेंट्स वाली स्टेज पे है. और ये वाला जो बैच है, they just got in, they have good experience. I think average is 3 to 4 years experience from industry. और इसमें सॉफ्टवेयर इंजीनियर्स भी हैं, मार्केटर्स भी हैं, फ्रेश ग्रेजुएट्स भी हैं. So we have a very good mix here. एक तो we would love to learn आपका, I love that part जो आपने NDU में present किया था, the historical one. So I think let's start from there. जो आपका वो historical.
So would you like me to give an overview of my thesis, I guess, is what you're saying?
Yes.
On Pakistan? Okay.
जी बिल्कुल.
So Pakistan is a very unique opportunity, in my view, because if you look at the global, in terms of how countries have grown over the years, right? And one of the biggest complaints that Pakistanis have is, why aren't we're always comparing ourselves to India. But what we don't realize is that the world operates in cycles, and effectively capital flow is linked to the surrounding value extraction that has happened, right? So obviously related to risk. So Pakistan, obviously, in the security paradigm that began in the year 2000, was less attractive versus in 2020, when we're, I would say, in the healthcare or the pandemic paradigm, where effectively you're seeing the regional situation change significantly from a geopolitical perspective. So now I'll draw back all the way to 1914 and 1945, because effectively the changes that the world is going through today are no different than 1914, World War I and World War II. And those were, at that time, if most of you recall in history, probably the fastest adoption of the manufacturing age was during that period. And the two wars effectively resulted in massive automation in terms of everything from machine guns to tanks to aircrafts, military aircrafts, to battleships, submarines. All these things took place, right? But really, there was an underlying cause for that disruption, and that was two scenarios. Prior to 1914, the world was effectively dominated by the landed class, and that was your agrarians, the feudals or monarchies, princely states. And that had existed for hundreds of years, right? But underlying around the late 1800s, we had the Industrial Revolution take hold, and that effectively was rising and coming up and disrupting the landed class. So really in 1914, that process began. And in 1945, that process culminated. And the key factors in that was the British Empire was primarily an agrarian empire, even though they had manufacturing, but really they were the dukes, and all the titles were landed titles. And the Americans were effectively a manufacturing empire. And so at the tail end of the British Empire, what you had was the disruption of the American empire, and post those two transitory periods, you effectively had the US dollar become the reserve currency of the world in 1945. And then the barons of that next cycle, which the cycle at the tail end of that cycle we exist today, were the industrialists, where they disrupted those feudals and princely states and even monarchies in many of the countries around the world. So now I'll fast forward to our world, where the information age effectively began in 1995, and it started its gradual disruption of the industrial age. The cataclysmic event I will link it to, which was again a geopolitical event, was 2001, which changed the landscape of the world. And I would call that World War I. And I will call March 2020 effectively, in a very speculative manner, World War II. So that paradigm velocity of time is compressed because things are speeding up, obviously, right? Communication, we don't write letters anymore. We communicate via WhatsApp and email. So information is, I would say, pervasive almost, right? Or ubiquitous. So in that period, the same acceleration, if you notice, that's taking place over the last 20 years is the new barons of the world, and that's quite evident in the US at this stage point in time, are the technologists or the information age based companies, also known as the FAMs in the US, that effectively now have a collective market cap of 30% of the S&P 500, which if you went back 10 years ago, the collective market cap of tech was roughly around 10%. So it's showing a pattern. And I personally believe that by the end of 2030, we'll probably see somewhere around 60 to 75% where tech dominates. And that's the essential disruption that we're facing, which in my opinion is a godsend for Pakistan. And I'll walk you through that thesis to quite an extent. So Pakistan's biggest issue has been basically our GDP growth rate based on the population size, but really it's more about a documentation issue because the underlying economy, in my opinion, is quite big. PwC speculates it's somewhere around 35%. Just given a ballpark rough assessment of the assets that are visibly visual to us in terms of form of housing, I would beg to differ. I would say it's probably at least another 300 billion of our, I would say probably like 50% of the economy is black in Pakistan. If you look at the regulatory transition that's happening in the world, especially with regulation like OECD Common Reporting Standards, with FATF that is pushing for cashless societies, what we're heading into is basically a massive tech adoption, and that will result in the documentation of the economy. And I'll walk you through how and what's happening in the B2B space, B2C space. So when you look at the simple example for every single person, I think most of us have used a Careem at some point or the other. We're familiar with Foodpanda. So these platforms are nothing more than general ledgers where they're effectively creating a use case to lure people online. And even if you're settling in cash, once you've used this platform, that transaction is logged digitally. And eventually you'll see a wallet play come in. And once we move to digital payments, the concept of having, I would say it's almost the informal economy that had existed. So for example, if you go to a restaurant and they accept cash, that would never ever get logged in the documented economy, right? Now it's logged effectively. So the case in point was when Careem exited to Uber. This was, I think, about 3 years back. About $3.1 billion was the total exit. About $800 million of that value came from Pakistan. And this was, by the way, incidentally, the same time where the government of Pakistan was going to different countries, requesting for them to park $1 billion into our state bank just to bolster our foreign currency reserves. So I'm just trying to explain the power of the entire changes that are coming. And so for me personally, what's about to happen, I think people are underestimating. I remember my fund one I raised from the local business family. So the investors were effectively the main backers of the Blackstone Group. And then you had Gul Ahmed, Al-Karam, Premier Group, a lot of the guys that are your traditional industry-focused individuals. And I remember pitching to them back in 2018, explaining the quantum of wealth that's going to come into tech. And it wasn't fathomable for most of them at that point in time. And if you've noticed what's happened just in the last 6 months, the quantum is just, this is, to me, is just the tip of the iceberg. It actually starts to grow at a very rapid pace. And again, the reason it's growing is because it's capturing the informal economy in these platforms, and that's where the value is coming from. So that's the overall thesis for Pakistan, why I think we're going to grow. I think you're going to see effectively growth rates in Pakistan that we haven't seen in the past. They're not going to come from GDP, your traditional GDP measure, which is productivity. There's only so much we can do in productivity, but it will be the informal economy that gets captured, even if at a rate of 3%. In a frontier market, by sheer momentum, you're going to see at least a 3% average growth rate. Let's say we get things right and on the traditional economy and we start doing a 2 to 3% growth rate. So you're looking at 6. And I think the informal economy getting documented from regulation and tech will probably tack on anywhere from another 1.5% to possibly 3% as this accelerates. And that is where China got that 9% growth rate. where a lot of people didn't understand when they would say they're fluffing the numbers. Both India and China were really growing at about 5 to 6% at a base rate. And really 2 to 3% was coming from their informal economy that was being documented. Where if you look at India, they're effectively 80% banked today, and China is effectively a cashless society. Brother, I'll give it back to you from there, because I can keep going on for hours. This is many years in the making, the thesis.
नहीं बिल्कुल जी, absolutely. Thank you so much. I think for me it was an eye opener, and I'm sure this is an interesting thesis. Very very interesting. I really like it, and I thought that would be a good start. Before we move forward, I would love to कि आप share कर सकें कि आपने किन किन companies में invest किया और कैसा experience चल रहा है आपका?
Sure. So I've lost track. I think I've done about close to 8 to 9 investments in Pakistan so far. There's about 7 more that are done, will be announced in the next, I would say, couple of weeks. We're having to move really fast because, as you can see, money is just starting to pour in. So luckily for the local funds, we're having to compete and really do some work for a change. So the main, again, in the thesis, the type of companies that we're going after are companies like Bazaar, for example, right? That is your quintessential, your play of capturing the informal economy. Taking what the distributors and resellers are doing down to the retail level and capturing it in this platform. And that's why you're seeing this hyperbolic growth, whether it's Bazaar, Tajir, or retail, they're all effectively doing the same thing, right? Another company we've invested in is Grocer App. That's actually a Lahore-based company. Same model, effectively. Groceries are going online post the pandemic. It's accelerated. We all see, if you trace the lag effects, we've seen these models in the US. There's another company similar to that, Airlift, that just raised 85 million. We haven't taken part in it, but I think it's a phenomenal company as well. And that the two models are, Airlift is DoorDash, which is top-ups. Grocer App is your Amazon Fresh, where you do your bulk orders. And so there's dichotomies in the market.
So this is important, Faisal. Sorry, जो भी आपने बात की कि how to differentiate between Grocer App and Airlift. An average person or a layman would think कि दोनों एक ही काम कर रहे हैं, तो वो दोनों क्यों market में इकट्ठे चल रहे हैं? So I think having that lens is critically important, if I'm not wrong.
So it's based on human behavior patterns, right? So let's say today when you go grocery shopping, so you would go to an Imtiaz or Al Fatah, and the reason why you go there is there's a diversity of SKUs in terms of products. All the products are aggregated in one place. So Grocer App's model is more linked to the Imtiaz and the Al Fatah, where it's a virtual experience, the most amount of SKUs, and you're topping up, and there's always enough supply for you to top up, right? And I mean, they're scaling based on that. They've in fact just added a 70,000 square foot facility in Lahore because the demand is outpacing supply, right? So they're having to do that, right? On the Airlift side, there's also a need because let's go to the behavioral pattern, right? So now commerce is effectively, I'm out of milk. I bought my groceries for the week, the larger bulk ones, but now I'm out of tomatoes, I'm out of milk, I'm out of Diet Coke. So at that point, I press the button. Their average basket size is roughly around 600 to 700 rupees. In Grocer, the average basket size is around 2,700 rupees. So that kind of shows you the behavioral patterns. And that's the same again in the US. Amazon Fresh is not going to deliver to you in 30 minutes. Their value proposition is that, hey, come online, you get the same virtual experience as walking to a grocery store, but it'll be at your doorstep the next day, effectively. Pick your time slots. And DoorDash effectively will get you whatever you want at a fee, but it'll be at your doorstep in 20 to 30 minutes. And I'll tell you why now commerce can potentially make sense in Pakistan, because this was one of the debates we were having, that look, in Pakistan, everybody has household help, right? So you can just send the guy to go and fetch effectively something from the market that you need to top up, right? But as we're moving, as the demographics in Pakistan are changing, the median age is 22.8. There's a lot of younger people that are moving to living independently in cities, right? That apartment culture or shared living concept is starting to emerge now, especially for your urban working youth. At that stage, we do feel that they don't always have help around, right? They're working, they come home. So DoorDash model also fits well, which is effectively a Panda Mart or your Airlift model. So that's the dichotomy between the two.
Excellent. नहीं बिल्कुल और बताइए investments. आपकी कौन सी हैं? So these were, but so actually generally बिल्कुल average person जो है वो can't differentiate between grocer app and Airlift. वो समझते हैं दोनों compete कर रहे हैं. But I think this is critical, especially from our degree perspective, because this is the kind of business model differentiation they really need to understand. So thank you for sharing this.
Absolutely. The other ones I've done, again, it's not, there's no need to reinvent the wheel. I mean, I think you just look east and west and you see lag effects, and what's worked is going to work here as well. So it's easy to go after basic use cases. One of the other, this was actually, I'd say, one of my first investments in Pakistan, and one of a company I'm very, very personally really like is bookme.pk, and they're just effectively solving your travel. It's the Orbitz or the Expedia of Pakistan. And it's, in Pakistan, most of the people, because distances are so short, you're not going to travel by air. Also, price sensitivity also restricts people from that. So commuter buses is where the bulk of your middle and lower middle income bracket is using, especially students. A lot of students actually use the BookMe product quite a bit. And then they added airlines and they've added hotels. And effectively, the end goal is to effectively capture that entire market. If you look at Indonesia, which is one of our closest comparables, there's a company there called Traveloka that reached a market cap of roughly $4.4 billion. And I believe they're doing a SPAC where they're going to get a valuation of $10 billion. Pakistan is no less of an opportunity. I think this is a unicorn level play. And there's a lot of scaling potential. We've also then gone into e-commerce. When we looked at the e-commerce vertical, what really stood out was the fact that Daraz is a dominant play. And that's your Amazon of Pakistan, right? But after that, there's no real player. You just have market leaders in different segments. But when you look at the landscape, eventually you're going to have growth by acquisition. When I say growth by acquisition, JD.com, that's owned by Tencent, is looking to enter. You've got Noon.com that wants to enter. Amazon is definitely going to make its foray over the coming 24 to 36 months. So they won't enter greenfield into Pakistan. What they will do is they will acquire market leaders in each vertical. And so when we did the analysis, what we felt was one of the better segments was the beauty and personal care segment that was unaddressed in Pakistan. And we went into baggallery.com, which is a beauty and personal care segment. And they're again similar to Namshi or Namshi in the UAE or Nykaa in India. That's the closest comparables. We've done Knowledge Platform, which is an edtech company. They're again, scaling here and there. It's K through 12 is the objective there. Let's see how this unified curriculum has an impact. I think they're gonna have to go back and redraw some of the content. And then Rumi, which is another one that I like because it's the travel space. I really feel Pakistan's domestic travel is going to increase significantly with your millennials and Gen Zers that can't sit still in one place. They love to travel. Unlike my generation that would want to always hop on a plane and go abroad, they're going to move domestically, especially to the northern areas. So Rumi is solving that problem. And we think it's going to, it's actually scaling really well in terms of its scale. On the new fund, again, I've done, Bazaar is one of them, grocer app. K-Trade, which is the Robinhood of Pakistan. The exposure level that people have gotten to the stock market, when you look at it from a macro perspective, is very limited. There's actually only about 200,000 active players in the stock market. And that's the same reason why people are unbanked. Your traditional broker dealers they keep chasing the same high net worth clients, and they don't expand the base. But it's basic logic when you look at Pakistan, that when 70% of the population is below the age of 30, you're going to start doing fractional trades and engaging younger people to come online, even if they're allocating 5,000 rupees or even 1,000 rupees and start investing. We think that's going to be the natural pattern. You can look at Zero Da in India. It's done really well on the same model. And Robinhood is one of the famous cases. The other one, the last one that I can mention, the rest I can't really mention, but I'll tell you the synopsis of what they are. The other one we've done is Truck It In. That's the logistic industry in Pakistan. We also feel that's ripe for disruption. Comparables in the region obviously are Blackbox and Trucker in the MENA region. Again, it's just bringing price discovery and market symmetry in that industry that's a very fragmented industry today. So you effectively pick up the FMCGs on one side, and their biggest issue is basically offloading and arranging the relevant trucks, and you get the trucking agents on the other side and create more symmetry there. After that, mostly the other investments we've done are diversified. I can talk about them once they're announced, but I can tell you that's primarily in the FinTech realm. The reason is because I don't go for payment gateways because I really think the Easy Pesa, Jazz Cash, and a lot of the banks have effectively solved that layer. What I'm going for more is use cases like buy now, pay later, or your cashback models. I feel those are going to really scale, especially in a very price sensitive market. Devaluation is going to keep coming in Pakistan. And by the way, that has nothing to do with Pakistan. We do not control that. That's linked to the US dollar. And based on that, what I feel is that people are going to look for deals and effectively layaway products in the future.
So lots of investments. So हमारे पास we just spoke to Shahryar Haidari in the morning. So truck it in आपके साथ वहाँ common है. Knowledge platform. We have Hira sitting with us.
Hi Hira, how are you? Haven't seen.
Knowledge platform इधर ही हमारे पास. So she'll be speaking right after you. So we'll have that as well. So that's great. अब थोड़ा सा जो फैसल आपसे आपकी इंसाइट देखना चाहेंगे कि अभी जितने स्टार्टअप्स हैं या इकोसिस्टम जो इवॉल्व कर रहा है, जो चेंज आ रही है, उसमें क्या ट्रेडिशनल डिग्रीज और ट्रेडिशनल पैटर्न्स वाली चीजें चल जाएंगी या the new models and the new bite-sized learning and actual closer to tech wali learning and the business side of tech, how important is that? Because एक तो pure engineering वाला है, which is hardcore IT or tech या deep tech कह लें उसको, but उसके around जो business part है, the commercials and the logistics and the payments and all of those things, how important are they even within a pure tech organization?
Look, so I mean, what's about to happen is, as you see all this money pouring in, right? I mean, what's going to end up happening is they're going to have to hire resources. It takes people to build a company. So what I think tech scarcity is about to come. It's already here. It's really difficult to find a good CTO or developers. Two reasons. One, because these companies are well capitalized. Whether you're in this business or I'm sure you're feeling the pain there, right? And then there's a software expert.
दाल बराबर होती है ना, तो मैं तो बताऊंगा तो इतनी वैल्यू नहीं है. So I just thought I'll just get it validated as well.
But it's good for everyone in the room, especially the computer science and effectively MBA, right? Both of those skill sets are in demand. So I think obviously tech scarcity is there, but simultaneously there's also massive shortage of quality people in finance in Pakistan, like the CFO function, right? There's an massive issue and shortage of people in the chief commercial officer sense, effectively, right? Even on the compliance side. So effectively all the facets of the traditional role, applying technology as well, is just different silos, obviously. So Facebook's or LinkedIn's one of their biggest success has been their marketing side and their strategy. So even marketing is going to be massively in demand. But it just comes down to quality resources. So if the domestic market cannot produce it, these companies do have enough dry powder now to offer the international-based expat Pakistanis or even Americans money to come and work in the company. And I'm seeing that a lot. I mean, I've seen a CTO salary go as high as $350,000. So that's a big paradigm shift, right? So yeah, I mean, I honestly think that there's going to be an abundance of jobs for people that are skilled and somewhat think outside the box. I do think you have to think outside the box in order to be relevant and to be attractive to a lot of these companies. Like they do look for people that aren't stuck in the traditional industrial educational system mindset. You do have to think in a more creative way because you're disrupting the status quo. So that has its own way of approach.
Absolutely. I think
by 2030, things are going to be different, right? By 2030, a lot of jobs are going to be automated. So this is your run, the cycle 10-year. Go out there and basically join companies and get as much stock options as you can.
Absolutely. Our option is disrupting and challenging the status quo. I think that is kind of the core or the heart of our degree specifically. I'll open this up for any questions while you, please. थोड़ा सा ऊंचा बोलना पड़ेगा आपको. आपको आवाज आ रही है?
Like a bit of an echo, but.
नहीं, sorry. आगे आके पूछ लें. और भी जो क्वेश्चन को पूछना चाह रहे हैं तो you guys can just. हाँ, ये भी ठीक.
Am I audible now?
इसमें बोलना ऊंचा. मतलब वहीं से.
Okay, am I audible now?
जी, I can hear you.
So you just mentioned that a lot of companies are looking for people who are talented, and we also discussed earlier that they're looking for people who can handle a lot of things in one go. So one person can handle like product, the whole management side, the coordination side of a project. But how ready are companies for people like this? Because the thing is, when you are handling so many different tasks, like you're handling marketing side, the product development side, the other scopes of it, the finance, etc., it takes a toll on you. And that's the thing, that you need to change your culture for the people like that. But are the companies ready for it?
So look, the traditional companies, when I talk about traditional, I'm talking about the brick and mortar, right? I don't think they're ready for that, right? They like their silos and their functions. That's effectively 70 years of structures, right? Best practices, you can say. In the tech ecosystem, I was a founder myself, so I scaled a company in the US. So I can tell you from that experience, founders start a company is usually one or two people. There's limited resources. You have the first check, and you start to build. So initially, you wear every hat. You're the CEO, you're the CFO, you're the effectively the handling the accounts in terms of sending monthly payrolls, every aspect of it, right? Marketing, you name it, right? So you have to be a multitasking, multifaceted person. The way I look at it as a company, and I think that's the case with pretty much anything most people do, is that it's always an idea, which is a visualization in your brain, and then you're trying to bring it to fruition. And so you have to be the driving force. But then the differentiation between a good founder and a bad founder, that is to not is to allow to understand when to delegate, right? So a lot of the times with the startups we invest in, when they start to reach a critical stage, one of the biggest advice that I effectively give to them is, hey, start to let go, hire like a competent person. It's okay to pay them more, right? There, a lot of them are also have a scarcity mindset, just because that's a culture in Pakistan where you know try to curtail on the salary, right? Like pay someone more, bring them in. You're trying to recreate versions of you in that silo, whether it's the finance side, whether it's the marketing side, right? You, as a founder, you still have to be engaged. And then eventually the team gets to a level where one of the best mechanisms is your meetings. I mean, you do your Monday meetings where you strategize. The way I would do it was I would have a Monday check-in meeting, and then I would have a Friday checkout meeting. And it was not like checking and questioning everyone. It was more like, okay, how did we achieve our KPIs? What are we doing? Like, what's our strategy? How's the market shifting on us with competition? We need to take action. It's almost like a military strategy in this game, because the velocity is very, very rapid. You don't, this is not going to be a 10-year capture of the market. This is hyperbolic in its nature. So, but as individuals looking to work in these type of companies, I think your own neural connectivity has to be agile and willing to. It's okay. It's okay not to be in your own silo, and sometimes get something from another silo to take a challenge and learn. I do think that development teams, like in the tech side, those teams have to be incorporated with the marketing side as well, and the operations side in terms of meetings at least, because otherwise you're not going to have the harmony to deliver the product. Because UI ultimately is what's going to have the take rate, right? Especially in a B2, whether it's a B2B or B2C, the user interface is key for adoption. I hope that answered your question.
Thank you, Faisal.
Thank you.
G, any other questions, please? नाम भी याद हो रहे हैं मुझे.
So first of all, thank you very much for this session and for being available for us. For being available for us. So the question I have is, I don't have a specific question, but I was hoping that if you could shed some light on the FinTech, the atmosphere here in Pakistan. And I know I just have a vague concept. I don't have the concrete foundation in this specific field. But I do know that this is an area which needs a lot of changing and new developments in this. And you talked about earlier that a lot of portion of the economy is under the ground. The black money and money laundering. How can the FinTech solve these problems? And one last thing is, this is a problem which many influential people here in Pakistan don't want to be solved. They are happy with the system of keeping money under the ground off the books. So how do you solve a problem which people don't want to be solved in the first place? So
sure.
आसान सा सवाल है.
Yeah, it's actually pretty easy because I'll start from the last question first because look, without disrespecting anyone, the problem with Pakistan is that the status quo has gotten ahead by corruption, keeping people on payrolls, and stifling growth by controlling regulation. Right? And they want that system to continue. But let's walk through what the very system itself is morphing. And it's not because it's morphing because people are honest or want things to change. It's morphing because it's the need of the monetary system. So the four reserve currencies are the four central banks that actually matter. Those are the currencies on the SWIFT system, which is the Federal Reserve, the European Central Bank, the Bank of Japan, and the Bank of England. And gradually the Central Bank of China is becoming more and more important. And you can go and view the IMF SDR on the IMF's website, and you'll actually understand the actual monetary system in terms of how it's not presented overtly. That's really how where everything is determined. Every 5 years, the vote happens, right? Now, after the 2008 financial crisis, our monetary system, by the way, is debt-based. So every time debt starts to contract and liquidity starts to go from the system, which happens when you have borrowers running out of the system. And again, it's very visible in places like the US, where the day you start to see 0% financing on furniture, believe it or not, there's 0% financing available in parts of the world on furniture for 36 months. That's typically when I start to move my stock market positions into cash because I know the next crisis is coming. And you can see yields start to move in a volatile manner. So after the 2008 financial crisis, effectively the world's global monetary system died, and they've kept it alive on the heart and lung machine in the form of printing money, and which they term as quantitative easing. So what we're heading into now is that the solution that they've come up with is to effectively push for FATF, which is a financial action task force, and in a very blunt mechanism, it does not care about money laundering or narcotics or whatever you want to call it, right? Because a lot of the off-balance sheet transactions of agencies anyways happen on narcotics. In a very blunt manner, I'll just say that, right? So what you're really looking at is they want to document the world, to grow the GDP of the world, because the deflation that we've encountered, which was pretty much predictable after 2008, I had placed shorts for 2021. I got lucky that, the Black Swan event happened, and it happened in March 2020. But most people at a global macro level after 2018 started going cash. And we knew that the response was going to be to start to push for cashless systems. So this is coming at a very high level place. So I'll walk you through our neighbor India, which is our closest comparable. So let's go through what they did, right? Modi was brought into power. I keep saying that because I saw the pattern there. He was not elected, he was selected through the media that was bought out by the foreign powers in 2013. Once he was brought into power, he wanted to create a nationalist movement. One of the first things he did was his alliance with Ambani, who effectively owns Jio today. Jio, the payment platform in India that has an ecosystem of 400 million people. He demonetized the rupee, which was politically a suicide, but it was actually designed for digital adoption. And that resulted in India effectively having 80% of the population banked in wallets or banks effectively. And so this is a requirement by you can say the international regulators or policymakers. And that's where you see it in the form of OECD Common Reporting Standards and in the form of FATF. So Pakistan is being pushed in that direction. Case in point is we're going to stay on the gray list until we tackle the source of fund issues for property. We're going to, or pretty much every asset, right? Let's look at the black economy. In order to park physical money, you need to actually put it in some asset. There's only so much you can consume. I mean, if you have, let's say, and believe it or not, in India, these type of numbers are discovered, right? $50 billion in cash, effectively, in Indian rupees equivalent, people had. And they whitened it through the mandirs and all those charities when they demonetized the rupee, and they took a haircut of 20% effectively. But in Pakistan, let's say if you have $1 billion, I'll just say $1 billion rupees, right, of cash. I mean, how much of that are you going to go spend at Al-Fatah and anything that you can't really hold physically? Otherwise, you'll get caught, right? So you can't buy vehicles anymore, which was one of the biggest ones where you park money. Property was the number one. Yes, post the pandemic, they've temporarily suspended it. But if you recall, the shut before that source of funds were questioned. It's going to be back. I think our maximum deadline is December 31st. But I don't know whether actually extended it on June 30th or not. I know that was the previous deadline. The source of funds question. Right. But again, the reason I'm going on this entire long-winded sermon is that in order to understand fintech, you have to understand who's pushing for it. Nothing is organic in my world. Everything is predictable because you can see the policymakers pushing for stuff, right? Even Afghanistan was fairly predictable, the exit and the status quo that's going to be implemented there. You'll see in the next couple of days. These agreements were done for 5 years in Qatar. So what we're heading towards now is everything is traceable. Traceability is the name of the game. That's what technology is for. The end goal is to create a digital currency, a central bank digital currency, which is going to interlink to all the other central banks. When you look at the structure of the world as Bank of International Settlements, underneath that, you basically have your Fed. Even the State Bank of Pakistan is developing its node known as RAST, which is again funded by DFID and some of the other American, I think it was Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation that funded it. India has UPI. So if you look at the structure of how the digital payments ecosystem is changing, it's all going cashless. So KYC, AML, CFT, all this stuff, just think about 10 years out, will be a no-brainer. And so all these people will eventually, whether it's 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, Pakistan is going to demonetize the rupee. And it will start with the garb of, hey, we're changing the format of the currency note. These ones rip, we're getting the pseudo-European plastic ones. They'll just bring less currency in circulation. But I think what any country, before they can do that, effectively, they have to wait for 60 to 70% of the population to have smartphones. We just reached that critical mass, by the way, in December of 2020. I think probably in the next 2 to 3 years, you will see some sort of demonetization. And that's where you're going to see fintech skyrocket, right? So we're, as venture capitalists, our job is to see the surrounding environments and try to predict what will happen, because we're in the job of betting on the future. And basically, we then place our bets based on that, and with that analysis. So I guess that answered the second part of your question. Fintechs are nothing more than use case. Everything that's in banking is going to come in. And remember, I mentioned that the monetary system is debt-based, right? So in countries like Pakistan, you're not going to have mortgages and auto financing as the sole mechanism. What you're really going to have is things like nano lending, microfinance lending, even buy now, pay later. These are all going to be effectively debt instruments. And then from a liquidity sense, what will happen in the back end, in fact, part of our fund, my fund is also a lot of the partners are former Goldman Sachs executives. So we have a debt side of the fund in anticipation of this, where what we think is that all these platforms that are going to lend, and your traditional banks are going to give their balance sheets for them to lend, then you're going to see basically liquidity get created in the system where funds are going to show up, buy up tranches of buy now, pay later, or nano lending, microfinance lending from, let's say, Abhi Finance, for example, right? I'll give you actual world examples, or Easy Pesa, or Jazz Cash. They all have lending products within their platform. We buy those tranches, then we buy some from India, we buy some from Bangladesh, some from Egypt, lump them together, have like Moody's or one of the rating agencies give it a rating, and there's an effective yield on it. And then you sell it to effectively some sort of a pension fund, institutional, or a sovereign that's looking for fixed income. So that's how liquidity is created. So that's the end game for fintech. And the use cases have to be effectively local in terms of financing. So whether it's payroll, cash advances, that's what I feel is going to scale more than anything else. Most of the products, I think in about a year or two, you will be able to buy on installments pretty much from all the e-commerce stores, because a lot of those platforms are coming as well. So just think of fintech as a traditional means. In Pakistan, to grow debt, we've never had debt in Pakistan, so it's tougher to visualize. In Karachi, the closest, and I don't know who's from Karachi. There's a company I'm investing in Karachi, so they told me this. There's a guy named Surmawala that does 5 billion worth of buy now, pay later lending to traditional shops. So it's things like that that are going to get digitized. I think there's an electronics store in Lahore and Faisalabad. They're supposed to be one of the biggest, effectively, buy now, pay later mechanisms offline, where they give you loans for fridges and all these type of things. Right? So everything you're seeing that's happening in the informal economy, that's going to start happening in these platforms, and those are the use cases. Sorry, I'm going to go on for a while on fintech. I took more than I did, but I wanted to explain it conceptually from the back end of what's happening.
Well, Randy, this is absolutely fantastic, actually. मैं वो सोच रहा था जितनी आसानी से आपने सारी टर्म्स और चीजें बता दी हैं, आई एम श्योर दैट्स अ रिच वन. We'll have to replay this few times to really get a hang of it.
They would get in trouble with some relevant authorities because I said too much on the certain other geopolitical events.
And yeah, I think this is absolutely fine. I think that's a very deep eye around the ecosystem. I think that's thinking beyond the box वाला जो part है वो out of the box is critical. कि हम कितना दूर तक हमें सोचने की या देखने की या visualize करने की या anticipate करने की capability चाहिए to figure out कि हमने next investment कहाँ करनी है. So I think that's brilliant. I loved it. So any other questions? I hope you got a good sense on buy now. But just to give you context, अभी स्टेट बैंक के नंबर्स के मुताबिक, if I'm not wrong, only 20% of the economy is banked. 80% is unbanked. इन 20% में भी अगर मेरे 3-4 बैंक अकाउंट हैं, एक जैज कैश है, इजी पैस, वो सब उसमें एग्रीगेटेड इंक्लूडेड है. सो इसमें मंथली एक्टिव यूजर्स या वो नहीं हमें पता, ये एग्रीगेट हमें पता है 20% है बैंक. एंड ओनली 1% ऑफ पाकिस्तान पॉपुलेशन हैज अ क्रेडिट कार्ड. और इनमें वो भी हैं जिन्होंने फोन करके बताना होता है कि ऑनलाइन के लिए खोल दें, ऑनलाइन के लिए ऑफ कर दें. सो दैट्स ऑल इंक्लूड. सो इट्स अ प्रीटी open market with 220 million people. So I think जैसे उन्होंने फैसल ने बताया इंडोनेशिया के साथ जो comparison किया, that's a very comparable economy.
I mean, we're the 5th most populous country in the world, and something that was a drag in the previous measure of GDP, because remember once all these digital platforms come online, RAS interlinks with the effectively the Bank of International Settlement, what you're going to start seeing is the real measure of economic GDP down to a village, right? Right now we have these lag effects, these paper-based assessments and extrapolations. Instead of extrapolations in real time, you're going to be able to see what economic activity is. Again, project like 15 years out, 20 years out. I mean, don't put a barrier of thought, glass ceiling, right? One of the biggest gifts you got is free will, right? So use it to think outside the box. And I personally think that, in that world, it's going to be very different, where if down to a household, you can see in real time what the economic activity and growth rate is, that's going to change the entire structure of the world. And that's really where we're headed. If you look at all the signs with the Federal Reserve developing a central bank digital currency, the Chinese developing a central bank digital currency, this is a new form of monetary policy with programmable money, where you can effectively airdrop or give stimulus to people in particular industries, and then with a timestamp on the money. So lots of changes ahead. I'm throwing these words for you guys just so maybe if you Google them, you read articles.
Absolutely, I think thank you so much. The airdrops मैंने काफी देर बाद सुना है कि जबकि coins जो हैं वो उनके launches कम हुए हैं, तो वरना उनके airdrops काफी हो रहे थे for pumping and dumping.
Well, adoption, yeah. So that's all it was. It's like you're gifting something for people to get used to.
Ji, please.
Thank you for this amazing session, firstly. Secondly, my question, I'm not sure if it is that relevant, because Sir Badr, firstly, jab wo baat kar rahe the about airlift and Grocer app. So I was thinking that I have been a regular user of Grocer app and for grocery and stuff, and I have been using now. I started using Cheetah. Maybe you've heard about it.
Yeah,
they have launched grocery side of online application, where they have all the groceries listed and everything, and they have pharma, they have lots of categories, including food, everything. So I want to ask that how do you see it rising as a competitor with Grocer's app, or how do you see both of these existing in the system, and how do you see the impact of Cheetah improving their service? Because previously they were nothing, apparently, because I have been using Grocer's app for like 1.5 years, whole of the pandemic, and after shifting from for now I have shifted from Grocers to Cheetah because they are readily available. And sometimes मतलब ये होता है कि उनके पास they have all the items जो Grocers से पहले होती थी, जो Cheetah वालों के पास नहीं होती थी. So I just want to know, how do you see where it stands, Grocer's app? Where do you see it stand?
So look, so Cheetah is trying to be a super app, which I think, they're actually a pretty good product. They raise a lot of money, and that's why they're offering you pharma. And a lot of times, some companies will try to fulfill things themselves, but Cheetah's closest competitor is Food Panda, actually, believe it or not. If you look at Panda Mart and Food Panda, that is the ecosystem that Panda Mart is building. Again, remember, everyone's trying to capture economic activity, right? So Delivery Hero, a company that's a multi-billion-dollar company in Europe, they own PandaMart, and which is a Rocket Internet guys that also created Daraz, and it's like they're pretty famous in the tech world. So what they're doing is they're saying in the food space and grocery space, we want to control the market, but in the now commerce, where you press a button, 30 minutes, 45 minutes max, you get the stuff, right? Grocer app, I'll just tell you what my strategy is basically you're trying to build the traditional grocery store and ultimately exit it to Amazon. Because what I see, what the pattern is that with PandaMart, with Cheetah, you're going to go with where the discounts are. It's now commerce, basically, right? And what Cheetah has done uniquely is they're copying PandaMart, where they're effectively building the SKUs and dark stores themselves. But that requires a lot of capital. So, they're dependent on raising incremental capital. In Grocer App's case, all the focus is that build the highest lifetime value of the customer and sell it to an Amazon, sell it to effectively a noon.com, because when they enter, the number one play they want is the highest lifetime value, and groceries has that value. So all these businesses that you're seeing develop, eventually a larger player is going to buy them out. Really, the world is run by if I look at the American digital empire versus the Chinese digital empires, it's not too many tech companies. The FAMs on one side in the US, which is, when I say FAMs, it's Facebook, Apple, Amazon, Alphabet, which is Google's parent company, and Microsoft. And on the Chinese side is really Tencent and Alibaba, because if you look, even the other brands, if you look at China, JD.com, and I always forget the other big grocery store. Meituan, yeah. Meituan, or now the new one, Pinduoduo. These guys are going to be flooded with capital, and they're going to go for growth by acquisition binge, because effectively think of the reserve currencies in the SWIFT system. So Pakistan's priced in dollars, right? So these platforms like Facebook will effectively in the back end be priced in dollars, even if you're buying things in rupees. And that's how the world structure is shifting significantly. So from an investor point of view, that's what I'm looking at it from a lens, that each one of these platforms is capturing market share and creating different use cases. And traditional, about 70% of the people that are using Grocer app, at least we can see in the back end, is housewives. So that product is basically designed for one type of a consumer versus another type of consumer.
Thank you.
Thank you, Faisal. और किसी का question? जी, very good. Faisal, I would love to know आपके angle से, and I don't know साइमा अगर आपका कोई specific question है, but I would like कि अगर आप share कर सकें थोड़ा सा अपना background context. क्या आपने शुरू से यही पढ़ा, या you were in a different line? How did it go with the flow? I think that would be interesting for them to get inspiration from. Okay, कैसे how did you evolve yourself?
Yes, I started with my undergrad was basically accounting and economics, and then I did a 5-year program. So I did a master's and an undergrad together. So my master's was in management information systems. So effectively, it was very similar to this program, where all three facets were I was exposed to, right? Then I went to a traditional Deloitte consulting, was there for 5 years, became an engagement manager. At that point, I moved over to corporate M&A in the US at a company called National Financial Partners. And then simultaneously, I've always been very entrepreneurial in my thought process. So I then basically created a company when I was 29 years old that took rights from Pakistani channels and put them on satellite platforms like Dish Network in the US, in Rogers Cable in Canada, pretty much all the cable and satellite platforms that you see. Even in the Middle East, there's a product called Pehla. That was actually my first entrepreneurial venture that ended up doing really well. So in 2012, I effectively quit what I was doing. And then basically I saw that actual first disruption. And this was actually, to be honest with you, the first wave of when I woke up in terms of tech being very important, right? So the internet, just to give you a bit of context, has been built on layers. And most of you guys are computer science background anyways, so you'll get this. So it's bound by two elements. One is the protocol level layer, and the other one is capacity, speed with which data can move, right? So you had dial-up and TCP/IP. So you effectively disruptions were email and very basic things like yellow pages, those directories where you would look up effectively businesses, right? As we moved to DSL, then we started disrupting travel agencies. Then you had subsequent layers of voice over IP being developed. At that point, venture capitalists were investing in things like Skype. There's a Pakistani origin venture capitalist in Silicon Valley, Asad Jamal from ePlanet Ventures. He made that call on Skype very early, and his fund ended up doing really well. Then the video over IP element was where I jumped on because I'd done this stuff on the traditional satellite and cable, and that I could see the disruption happening in the business. And different economies were different, where Japan is way ahead in terms of technology connectivity than the US and even Europe. So I could see in 2000, as early as 2002, that Japan had moved on to a medium similar to what we're communicating on Zoom, and delivery of television over the internet. And that was a whole different, it went from analog to obviously digital, right? Compression standards improved. So I jumped into a platform called, it was the Napster of its time, called Jadoo TV, that basically disrupted a lot of the traditional satellite, which was my incumbent business, you can say. Jumped onto that. That's once I caught that wave and you start to see the tech evolution in the back end, then you never look back. So, and did that for a long time, exited, had done a few exits already. They wrote a check to 500 startups, which is a big fund out of Silicon Valley, started investing alongside with them. And then just momentum kicks in, right? Once you get into tech, it's like a rabbit hole where you just, I'll close it off that eventually in 2014, I discovered as eureka moment that Bitcoin is effectively digital gold in a cashless society. And then the whole brainwave changed in a total different direction. So the point is that if you're going into technology, be open-minded. You can actually, it's a whole new digital world being created. Effectively, anything that exists in the real world or brick and mortar will at some point have to have a tech element to it. And so I don't think anybody's born as a venture capitalist with that mindset. It's like more of an art, right? You learn over time, you lose a lot of money, by the way, also getting to a point where you keep investing, learning. So first you have to crawl, then you have to learn how to walk, and then you have to try to run. And we keep stumbling. So I hope that gives a bit of a background perspective flavor.
जी बिल्कुल, absolutely, very fascinating. I think that gives everyone a hope कि हम सब भी कुछ कर सकते हैं, and I think that's important.
I think, brother, you've already built a pretty big company, so.
But I think I think everyone is learning every day. As you said, I think we make mistakes. We make big mistakes. And I think as we learn further and further, because जो भी हम करना चाह रहे हैं, everything is very kind of a frontier thing. Nobody has yet done it. So experimenting with a lot of stuff and having to bear the consequences at times is certainly, जिस आप venture capital में आप experiments करते हैं, I think product में, चीज में, I think there's always iterative process.
There's failures. I mean, it's not an easy business because the success rate of the ventures you invest in is 20%. So it's not very easy.
बिल्कुल, absolutely. So thank you so much, Faisal. I think this was really, really great. And I know अभी आपने 6-7 investments announce करनी है, so I'm sure you are busy. And we have certainly eaten up someone's time here. कोई pitch deck लेके बैठा होगा बाहर. So thank you so much. I think this was excellent.
Inspirational.
Very inspirational. Thank you so much.